of the absolute ironies of our criminal and juvenile justice system is found in the fact that it's individual victims that are affected the most dramatically by crime in our society, yet those individuals are kept totally on the sidelines of how we do justice. They're not a part of the process. Crime in our system of law today is defined as being against the state. And actual crime victims have very little involvement. In most cases, they have almost no involvement. The extent to which they're a piece of evidence, and that's needed in the process of prosecuting the offender, they may receive some attention. But victims of crime typically have no way of getting answers to questions they have about what happened, being able to express their feelings about what went on. There's just no way. And in fact, victims of crime who are more assertive and request input are oftentimes either ignored or not responded to very favorably by the system. Our system of justice is so offender-driven. It's a trail 'em, nail 'em, jail 'em kind of mentality. Next case. And victims of crime are totally left on the side. The victim-offender mediation process is designed to provide an avenue for crime victims to be actively involved in the process of holding offenders accountable, and also to allow offenders to be more directly involved in taking responsibility for their behavior and making amends. What you'll be seeing in the following interviews are victims of crime who have participated in the mediation process. You'll hear some of the fears, feelings that they had about the victimization, concerns they had about even meeting the offender face-to-face, and finally, you'll hear about their experience in the mediation process and even several months later, how they're feeling about this whole event.
When I got the forms from the judicial system on reporting what happened, what's the amount of damage, what's the insurance company you're using, what's the deductible, and I found myself going through that process of answering all those questions that I wasn't satisfied. That just filling out a one-page form and signing it hardly satisfied a need that I had. I think in wanting to make a connection between myself and whoever out there was in my house. So I decided to write a letter, and I addressed it to the corrections judicial system, saying I have some ideas of what I'd like to do with the boys who were in my house, and I proposed 4 or 5 suggestions, and sent that letter along with the forms to the judicial system. I didn't hear anything, I think, for a month or 2 months, and so one day I couldn't wait anymore, and I picked up the phone, and I'm not sure what number I called. It was probably a telephone number that was on some of the correspondence that I had gotten. And I inquired about what was the status of my case. I was finally referred to an office, and I said, I'd like to know what's happening with my case. And the voice said, well, the boy will be going to court on Tuesday. I said, the boy? I said, there were 2 boys. And I said, I've written a letter, and I'd really like to know what I can do in this. And the voice on the other end said, and these are the exact words, the court is not interested in creativity. The court is interested in consistency. Real disappointment. I think that's the major feeling, that I really thought I had a good idea here and that the idea was worthwhile and that I had a need to want to do something and I couldn't do it. And so for about 2 days I lived with this feeling of real disappointment. And then the disappointment started turning to anger. And about 2 or 3 days after that, I thought, I've got a good idea here, and I'm willing to give this some time. I'm willing not to get paid for any of this. Why can't I do this? And I don't think that we have to treat everybody the same. And it was ironic that that same day that I started coming to some of those conclusions in my mind, that someone from the Restorative Justice office called and said, and these are the exact words of that person, we just read your letter and we think it's creative.
Through victim-offender mediation, crime victims have the opportunity to meet face-to-face with a person who violated them and ask them, why? Why did you do this? Who are you? What do your parents think of this? Did you ever think of how this could affect my children? It allows offenders to be able to understand crime victims as real people with feelings and hopes and dreams, not just targets and objects. It allows offenders to take direct responsibility. In a sense, there's an element of face-saving, to admit that what they did was bad, but to take responsibility in making amends, in righting the wrong.
I really wanted to know why he couldn't stop and knock on our door and tell us that he had done something. I just couldn't understand why he couldn't have gotten out of his car to ask for help or to tell us what he had done. And I think that I wanted to know that from him because I have always taught my children, and I believe that if you do something wrong, you just face it and tell the person and deal with the consequences. Mm-hmm. The second reason was the volunteers told me about this program, and I felt that if this program was really willing to deal with the offender, and if I can make a difference by telling this boy that I'm not angry, I just want to know.
Of looking them right in the face and asking them why. What made you do this? That was the one thing, because as you know, when you go through court, you don't get to ask all those questions.
I can remember that first reaction. As I turned away, going to the living room, my first thought was, who would do this? I was absolutely bewildered because I work really hard at not having enemies, and I couldn't imagine who would do this to me. That was a question that really haunted me through the next day until the police called informing me about who had done this. I had to do a seminar for a statewide conference, and so the whole morning of doing that seminar, the question that was in the back of my mind is, who would do this? And the scary thing to me was that everybody became a suspect in my mind. My own students started becoming a suspect. My neighbors started becoming a suspect. Acquaintances, and every time I'd see somebody, my reaction is that the person who would do this? And that was the real hard part for me to deal with that first day, is that sense about not having any idea who or why.
It's very important to understand that victim-offender mediation is quite different from other types of mediation that are widely understood. Mediation tends to have a very legalistic kind of connotation, where essentially disputants are negotiating and cutting a deal to compromise and find some common ground, to work out an agreement. Most civil court-related mediation is very agreement-driven. Victim-offender mediation, however, is dialogue-driven. The focus is on allowing the parties to have the time to talk about the full impact of the crime directly with each other, to get questions answered, and then finally to work out any agreement if that's needed. Agreements are quite secondary. In fact, research throughout the years has found that while the notion of getting restitution is very appealing to crime victims early in the process, after they actually meet the offender, that's not identified as the most satisfying factor. The most satisfying factor identified by crime victims consistently is being able to meet the offender. It humanizes them, it's less scary to them, they're able to go on with their lives in such a way that it just doesn't have the fear, the power that it used to have.
It was frightening, but I was kind of anxious to talk to him, you know, to maybe, I was praying that I could say something to kind of turn their life around. It wasn't, you know, it was concerning my family, but my family had came out victoriously in this situation, but I just wanted to, maybe I can help these boys in some kind of way. Maybe I could say something that would turn their life around and, you know, stop them from doing the things that they were doing.
Well, when we first met, we met in, I guess, a common space area of the Dakota County building. I wish we had not met that way. And I would suggest that they meet in a meeting room. But we had both, you know, I was sitting there with the volunteers because I had gotten there earlier, and so then the teenager and his mother came, and so I met them separately. but very unconscious, very conscious, knowing that we would have to actually talk to one another all the way to walking up the steps, going into the room. It seemed like endless to get there, and finally sitting down in the room. I guess my security was I needed that table in front of me that separated myself and him. But I did notice that he seemed like a very pleasant person. You know, everything about him, his posturing, was just very pleasant. I liked him right away. And so, of course, when we sat down in the room, I felt a little more comfortable, just a little, until the volunteers started the meeting, which then, you know, again, formalized the outline and helped bring some structure to the meeting, which helped. As the meeting was going on, and I felt that the mediators were definitely trying to get both myself and the offender to control the meeting, to be more interactive, then I started to relax. I could tell that the offender was very uncomfortable. I tried to ask him more questions, tried to find out more from him. So yes, I was getting more comfortable. I don't know if he was, but then I found myself trying to get him to be more comfortable so he could talk with me.
Victim-offender mediation is also different from other types of mediation because there's a good deal of preparation that occurs beforehand. In nearly all victim-offender mediation programs, the mediator will first go out and meet separately with the offender and then the crime victim to invite their participation, explain the process, and primarily to do a lot of listening to their story, to simply hear the victim's story particularly, and to validate those feelings.
Because you get to get a lot of stuff off your chest that you don't be able to get off in the courtroom. You know, you get to meet them face to face, and you get the eye contact with them, and you know, you never know, you can change someone's life, you know, from bad to good. So I think it's, and let them know really what they do to families when they do commit a crime against them.
I can't find any one item in that meeting that is most significant, because for me they were all significant. The first one I remember is the introduction, in which I was asked to talk about what it felt like to come home and find that somebody had been in my house. The process that I went through of feeling suspicious of everybody and what that's like to live in a neighborhood and be suspect of everybody who lives there. So talking about the feelings and the thinking early on was really important. And I think at the time I didn't recognize how important that was. But if we look at it psychologically, that's a really significant step to have a victim talk about that. Some people might think that this whole restorative justice process and working with the boys is making life soft for them. Well, it's just not true. I think they would have found it much easier to hide in a court system, to hide behind whomever and not have to deal with any of us.
Victim-offender mediation must be a voluntary process for crime victims. It is meant to empower them, to give them choices, to be able to reclaim a sense of power within their lives after having experienced a tremendous amount of vulnerability and fear and powerlessness through the victimization process. In order to make the victim-offender mediation process sensitive to the needs of crime victims, it's important to listen to crime victims, to hear their stories, to recognize there's no simple one-category type of response that crime victims have. We as crime victims respond in many, many different ways across a wide spectrum. But underneath it all, there tends to be the common denominator of a tremendous sense of powerlessness and vulnerability when we're victims of crime. The mediation process is meant to be a procedure where victims can get off of the sidelines of justice, be invited directly into the process of holding their offenders accountable, to be able to tell the offender what the full impact of that crime is upon their lives, to hear from the offender what the impact has been on their lives, and together to work out some level of resolution so that both can move on with their lives.
It ended with us hugging, and, you know, I'm telling them just, you know, go to school and try to make something out of yourself. It ended real well, you know. I didn't ask those guys for any restitution or anything, you know. The insurance paid for all the damage and stuff, and, you know, because I think when kids do stuff like that, you really need to talk to them and see what is the problem. And if they don't want to open up and talk to you, at least you can give them some encouraging words, and hope and pray that those words stick with them. And, you know, maybe a few words will make a difference in one person's life.
Suppose I felt good because I sort of did like a heart dump. You know, I mean, I don't know. It was so emotional. And sometimes I think back and I laugh because we joke, it was the homicide of my tree. You know, he killed my tree. That we laugh about that. But that wasn't really the thing. The thing was, there was a lot of feeling. There were a lot of feelings that went through my mind that I probably would never have cleared up. And every time my husband had asked me something, or my neighbor had asked me something, or my children had asked me something, I took on everyone's fears and tried to piece it together and tried to deal with it and tried to make them all think everything's fine, we'll deal with it. But I was coming up with my own fears and my own anger, and everything else that was coming out just disappeared after I left. So that's when I felt like everything that I needed to say was said. And I believe it was because of the way the mediators handled that meeting. I honestly believe that if they didn't do it, do it the way they did, and I can't tell you because I don't have those skills, I wouldn't have told this boy everything that I really wanted to say. So when I came out of there, number one, I felt like, all this weight lifted off my shoulders. I also felt like I could just look at him in his eyes and talk to him. I actually wanted to know him better. I felt good.
The bottom line in this process is creating a safe spot for both the crime victim and the offender, so that when you bring them together, they feel comfortable enough to talk directly with each other about the crime and its impact upon their lives and ways of making things right, of restoring some of the losses.
From a victim point of view, seeing my offenders face-to-face is absolutely crucial in the healing process, not only for the victim, but I think for the offender as well.
As a victim, I would say that what I have experienced has made me realize what the term means. It takes a whole village to educate and work with a child. Because up until this opportunity, I have never felt that I could make a difference. I think I can make it. I think I made a little difference in this boy's life. He sat there and he listened to me, and I think I became a real human being to him. I was able to do my heart dump to this child and tell him that it was awful for me, and I was probably as scared and fearful as he was. He probably realized. And it made me feel better because I could say what I had to say, and then I felt better. And my family feels better. So yes, that program helps me this way. So it's just an emotional, psychological thing for me. But I think it is my responsibility now as a victim to come forward and say something. And I was able to help my children understand why we can't just complain about everything that's happening in the world, and I for sure don't think all teenagers are bad anymore. That I try to protect my children from other teenagers. So that has made a big difference in my life.
So restorative justice really did something very different than the traditional judicial system does, which punishes people, which leaves victims on the outside looking in, which in the restorative justice system had me part of that process, see my offender face to face and work through a process with them. I think I'm better for it. I think they're better for it.
Studies in North America have found that victims who have participated in victim-offender mediation have a greater satisfaction with the justice system. They have reduced fear of re-victimization. These victims are far more likely to have losses restored, and they are more likely to have experienced fairness. For those interested in receiving more information about restorative justice, including articles, information packets, research reports, books, videotapes, and training and technical assistance that's available, contact Center for Restorative Justice and Mediation.